Hello, everybody. Dr. McGuire checking in. Another great conversation. Here's the teaser. When you give a presentation or you're publicly speaking to somebody, do you get anxiety? Or how's your format? Well, all those things we're going to talk about today because I'm a product of that before, my behavior of being anxious with presentations and public speaking. So I connected with Meridith. Meridith, how are you?
I am great. Thank you. How are you this morning?
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you for being my co-host today.
Heck
So
yeah.
you're the expert in this field. Talk to me briefly about what you do, right, regarding public speaking and presentations and how we can all benefit as we move forward in this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for that question. What I do, so I have a performance background and an improv background. So I have been on stages since I was 9 years old, starting with dance, and then moved into acting because someone told me I had a great stage voice when I had to do this triple turn and say, when I grow up, I want to be just like Wonder Woman. That was my line, which was true at the time. I was very young. And then one thing led to the next. And so I continued to study acting and perform professionally in San Francisco, Chicago, Colorado for a long period of time. And now I'm in New York City. And I was fortunate enough to find improv, which is what really has served my career well in terms of how I approach my clients when it comes to public speaking. And I started that because I was teaching using improv as a form of team building so that people could learn, heightened communication skills, adaptability, all those fun things through using improv. And then I got thrown to another assignment, which would be help this CEO over here, help the C-suite over here, and help this person, help that person. They have presentations coming up. You're an actor, you can do this. And I'm like, sure. And then I figured it out and I loved it. Loved the work because it was like directing. It's like directing my own little show, my one-person show. So I continued doing that. I developed Grundei coaching. I now work with clients who I have a group of students that I'm working with at Washington University with a program called Beyond Boundaries, which means it's like, the sciences meets the arts meets aerospace. I don't know. And I help them put together their pitches. I help them think about how they're going to show up for interviews or internship interviews. So that's been really fun. And then my one-on-one clients are predominantly solopreneurs who are 6 figures plus. And I work with organizations mostly in medical and in tech. And I love all of it. And it's such a diverse group of people. And when people ask me what my niche is, I kind of get a little unsettled in my body because I'm like, I don't want to have a niche. I love working with everybody. So
every day is different for you.
It is. Every day is different. I love it.
That's what makes it great.
Yes.
Thank you for that introduction. So let's dive into this.
Yeah.
We talked about, in no particular order, but let's start with why the story matters in your presentation and the building of trust matters.
Thank you for that question. Story matters because that is how we connect on an emotional level with our audience. That is where we show our commonalities. And that is the component that I feel is often missing from presentations, especially when you get into the place data, research. Data is a story in itself, right? So how do you tell that story so the audience remembers the specific things you need them to know? But there's we have pathos, logos, and ethos. And another way of looking at that, Frances Fry, who's a Harvard business professor, leadership coach, she has what's called the triangle of trust. And she talks about that in relation to leadership and building teams that are trusting teams and trust in leadership. And she says you have to have equal parts of authenticity, empathy, and logic. And if you're wobbling in any one of those 3 places, it's going to be very difficult to build the trust of your audience or your team. And I feel it's very true for a presentation. When you're up there on stage or you're putting together something as a pitch, think about, does this have equal parts of authenticity, empathy, and logic? The logic is all of that wisdom that you bring, all of that beautiful data and research. And then the empathy piece is the connection. That's that heartfelt connection. That's I'm in your shoes. And then the authenticity is showing up as you and practicing enough to where you are in a place that you can do that.
Wow. And yeah. Well, so my audience, as we talked about, are students, college students, maybe high school students. And that alone, what you just said, would present anxiety.
Yes.
To most. And that's cool, but that's what we're here to talk about. How do we reframe the negative?
Well, first of all, it takes the ability to notice. And I always use this Allen Ginsberg quote, which is he says, notice what you notice. And I always think of that in relation to my own body. Like, okay, notice the thoughts that are coming up just before I have to present, or when I get the assignment, or I know that I have to show up for something. Are you going, God, not again? Or are you thinking, I am really terrible at this. I have nothing to say. I'm not very interesting. I'm only 16. I don't have stories, whatever it might be. Really look at that self-talk and then transform it. One exercise I give people is to write it down. I was feeling really insecure when I was asked to do this project where I have to present. I felt scared. Maybe I felt this heaviness in my chest. And then if you can go deeper and go, what is that heaviness? What does that mean? Oh, that's fear. That was totally fear. That's what that was, or anxiety, or however you want to frame it. Write it down so that you're aware and then reframe it. I feel nervous and excited to do something that's going to challenge me because I know there's growth in this opportunity, right? That's a very different way of looking at it. It's okay to be nervous. It's okay to be uncomfortable. And I would say, if you are feeling nervous and you are uncomfortable, that's exactly where you should be. That could be something else that you put in your journal. This is exactly where I should be. This is actually an awesome opportunity, right? So that's what I mean by really looking at your mindset. And then I made some mindset cards because I was noticing this in my clients, even though, and I think teenagers don't understand that adults are experiencing the same things that they're experiencing, and that we don't at all have it all figured it out. And we're not going to have it figured out until we're in the grave. But that my clients were struggling with the same things. So I made mindset cards and I said, okay, here's some mindset cards. Just cut them out. You have them by your nightstand or wherever. You read them at night. You read them in the morning. You visualize yourself doing a really great job. And let's just keep working on it. It's like any other muscle. You just got to show up like you do at the gym and do the work.
Let's talk about that. So we can memorize, we can formulate in our head what we want to say. How important or not is having a piece of paper where we're at in your hand when you're giving a talk? Is that a crutch?
I think it depends on what's on that piece of paper.
True.
Right. So I don't necessarily think it's bad to have a piece of paper in your hand if you need it. But what's written on that piece of paper is going to do one of two things. It's either going to overwhelm you because it's impossible if you've written like your whole speech on a little piece of paper to follow that in the middle of a presentation. But if you're putting bullets down, like, here's my intro, right? Here's what I'm going to talk about in the first point that I want to make, and the second point I want to make, and the third point. And then here's what I need to make sure I say in the conclusion. And it's just like a 1-word prompt, whatever, that's fine. Because you're not going to be staring at that piece of paper the entire time, and you're going to be able to quickly locate what you need in the moment.
So it'll keep you on track.
To keep you on track. That's totally fine. I also feel that if you're super well rehearsed, right? Practiced, I should say, and you've simplified your structure, you should be able to get to those places without the piece of paper in your hand.
All right, so let's go one step further.
Yeah.
PowerPoints.
Oh gosh.
right?
This is
Oh,
a whole nother, we could talk
no,
about this for an hour.
right. But again, if it's we're talking about the paper and the bullet points, or what's up on the screen when one's referencing the PowerPoint presentation, let's talk about that.
Okay. Yes. I'm going to start with giving a great resource for people, which is Gar Reynolds, Garr Reynolds, wrote a book called Presentation Zen. And it is a fantastic tutorial on how to simplify your slides. So I'll start with that. It is all too common for me to see people who have so much information on their slides that it's impossible to connect with the message.
Mhm.
And because they feel like this is all they put their dissertation on slides and it's impossible to retain any of that as an audience member. It's overwhelming. Oftentimes the presenter will be speaking while they're presenting the slide. So if you're like me, who needs to visually see something and hear something, I immediately get overwhelmed and I stop listening and I check out. So you have to really you have to figure out how to design your presentation that is going to reach every single person in your audience. Some people might just be visual and read the slides and not listen to you and get all the information they need. Some people might be able to totally zone out the slides and just listen to you and get all the information they need. And then there's the people like me who need both, right? So
Right.
you need to simplify and you need to practice what your transitions are, how you're setting your audience up to see the slide, where you need to orient them to the slide. Where do they need to look once you've clicked onto that slide? And you need to ask the question first, do I even need this slide? And I'm going to back up even further now, which is most people I've noticed start with the slides. And I'm going to reverse engineer that. And I'm going to tell people that what's more effective is you start with your audience first. You ask all the questions. What do they know? What do they need to know? What do they not know? You need to direct your message and how you're going to best add value to that particular audience. And just because they're doctors doesn't mean you're going to cater the same message to all the doctors, because we all know there's different doctors they have different practices and different modes of expertise. So we need to know who our audience is, right? Then you figure out what is it that they need to know. What is my end in mind? What is my main objective for my audience? So come the end of this presentation, what do I need them to leave feeling or doing? Right.
Mhm.
And then once you figure out what that objective is, then you figure out the need to knows. And the need to knows are like, okay, so what do they need to know? The stepping stones to get me to that objective. And then you look at your slides and you go, okay, well, which one of these slides is going to best support that end in mind and those need to knows?
No, that's good. The other thing we forgot to mention is not you, but me. What if technology went down?
Oh, if your technology goes down, I love that question. You should know your presentation so well that you don't have to rely on your slides. You get to become a one-person show.
Oh, geez,
You do. I was just on a networking event last week where somebody had to present and she couldn't see her slides, but we could all see her slides. And she didn't know what to do. So there's also that adaptability piece, which is practice your adaptability muscle and your flexibility muscle, because when things happen, and they do, how do you pivot on the fly? What's your plan B? Figure out what your plan B is. Well, she was like, oh, can she ask somebody else to try to present her slides for her? And there was a lot of text on them. And then she instead of just saying, her being the expert in her field, instead of her just diving in and just saying, okay, off the cuff, this is what the slideshow was essentially about. And here's what I need from you. She just fiddled with the slides the whole entire time. And I have seen that happen so many times. Don't do that. Just don't do that. Your audience you lose your audience.
And or the IT person will come over, right? And start
Yes.
with everything. Yeah, I agree. Party
Yeah.
over.
Yeah. It's a, you know what? I hate to say it, but our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. And also that depends on who your audience is. So that's why it's important to know them. And on top of that, time, it needs to be valued.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this is when that happens, you're not valuing your audience's time.
Absolutely. So let's go over a few of these. I got only about 12 bullet points. And they're all common. We all can relate to them. And I hate to say I'm dumbing it down, this format here, but in no particular order. So here we go. Tongue twisters. Give me an example of a tongue twister. We all know what they are, but give me one if you can think of one off the top.
Okay, since I live in New York City, I always do this one for people first time, which is, New York, you need New York. You need unique New York. Do you want to try that back?
Oh, no. Nope. That's crazy.
So I teach the tongue twisters because these really help with, and I exaggerate, I really think about enunciating, how I pronounce things, articulate things, really hitting the consonants, really taking the time, I like to say, chewing the words. We tend, people will come to me, especially in the younger age group, like, oh, I noticed that I have an issue with upspeak, or I noticed that I drop the ends of my sentences. And yes, those things happen culturally. We pick up on habits. And what we want to do is drive energy through our talk. We don't want to drop the ends of our sentences. We want to be heard. We want to be clear. And I don't think it needs to be performative. Like I'm not asking people to be a Shakespearean actor. I am just inviting people to be more intentional with their speech.
More theatrical.
Or theatrical. There are moments where you need to be more theatrical if you need people to lean in and actually hear what you have to say. Right. I always recommend looking at some of the great speakers, Steve Jobs, Obama, Martin Luther King, all of these people that have done incredible speeches and are just incredible to listen to.
With that said, who would you say is the best speaker that you come across?
Oh.
Something we all can relate to.
I would say, I'm just going to say Obama, because I already mentioned him. He just really is, I would say, measured, if that makes sense. He takes you on a journey. He's very good with the pause. Yeah. He smiles when he speaks.
Very charismatic. Yes.
Very charismatic. Yes. He enters into space with open heart. And I mean that a lot of people get very cerebral about their message. They're very in their heads. To me, it's about finding that balance between mind, body, heart, connecting the three. That's when you really show up as your authentic self, and you've allowed yourself to be seen.
It's a great example. All right, what about, here I go, as I turn my ear. What about hand movement?
Hand movement. Oh gosh, I just did a TikTok about this the other day because I've had a couple clients who have gotten some kind of bad advice. I feel it's bad advice. So everyone's, has an opinion. Everyone's opinion can be different from the others, but they were told, there are psychological, body things that we can do gesturally that project certain like confidence and so forth. And one is holding your hands like this, right? Like kind of at waist side. It kind of shows that you're confident about what you're saying.
Do it now.
Yeah, like you're holding it like in a V. They were told to keep their hands at their sides the whole entire time, that they were gesturing too much. One of my clients happened to be Italian, and that's just what he does. And I feel that's very stifling, and that it can actually put somebody in their head if they're thinking constantly about what they're supposed to be doing with their hands. My philosophy is that you need to be well practiced. And when you're not well practiced, then what happens is you start focusing on the things like the hands because you need to control some aspect of what you're doing, right? And then that puts you in your head. So if you're well practiced, then what happens is that you start to naturally story tell with your hands. And so that's what I encourage my clients to do. I say, just story tell with your hands. Which means, like, if you're talking about some vacation that you took, where you went to the Bahamas and you were out by the ocean, then you might gesture outward, right? So that the audience can see what you're seeing in the storytelling. Or if you're talking about something that was in the past, you might gesture back. So it's really about allowing yourself to feel the words, but you can't do that if you're practicing the day before.
That's a good point. Yep. I mean, I like some movement when people do their pivoting.
I love movement. There's gesture and then there's movement. I always say when people are moving on stage that they should walk with purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You're moving in this particular, you've chosen to move in this particular time because you've changed your thought or your idea, or you need your audience to lean in more. So there's a reason why you move. You're not moving for the sake of moving, where it becomes unconscious.
What about if you're on stage and you're walking across the stage a little bit, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 foot? I don't know. They kind of drift.
Yeah, you've got to watch it. People pace back and forth because nerves will kick in. And then what happens is I start looking at your movement. This is me personally, not everybody, but I get distracted by your movement because remember, I'm the person that listens and watches at the same time. So the visuals are important to me. If there's too much body movement, I lose what you're going to say.
I'm going to throw this one in as I'm thinking about it before we go to the next one.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can read 1 or 2 or 3 or a handful of people not interested in what you're saying. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's going to be.
But there are times when people are talking and for whatever reason, the audience members, a few, whatever, checked out. Do you think that plays on the presenter?
Oh, yeah. I think it really affects the presenter. And here's what I have to say about that. You cannot project what someone is thinking or feeling. Someone could have
take it personally, though. They take it personally.
You cannot take it personally. You cannot take it personally. I have a great story that several years ago, I directed a show in Boulder, Colorado, and we had a sold out house. It was for a benefit. Only 3 actors in the show. It was a very intimate space. The only seat left was in the front row. So I was like, great. So I'll sit in the front row. So I sat in the front row and I was delighted by the show. I thought it was a great show. It's very funny. It was about 2 college professors. It was fantastic. And I thought all the actors did a great job. After the show, the lead actress came up to me and she said, "Did you hate the show?" And I said, "No, why?" She goes, "Because you looked miserable the whole entire time." And
wow.
I guess I was analyzing things. I was like, ooh, I really liked what they did there. And look at the audience. They looked delighted. Like I was really just super being analytical about how wonderful it had rolled out. And it made me think like, well, first of all, if you're in a leadership position and you're sitting in the front row, be a little bit more conscious about what your facial expressions look like. Right. And then second of all, it affected her performance. She was in her head because she thought I didn't like the show when in fact, I actually really was enjoying myself. So you have to be careful at what you project upon your audience. Someone could have had a horrible morning, found out someone died that day, or their car broke down, or that they can't get a babysitter and they're sitting here during this presentation trying to figure out how to problem solve. Like you just never know what's going on in somebody's world. So that's the first part I want to say about that. And the second part I want to say, which I think is also equally important, if not more important, is that not everyone in your audience is going to like your presentation.
True.
They're just not going to like it. Not everyone's going to resonate with you. And that needs to be okay. And that's why you don't follow every single person on TikTok or on social media, because not everyone resonates with you. You don't go see every single musician on the planet because you don't like all those musicians.
I see
right?
a lot in corporations where somebody comes in as a speaker and the employees could care less, right? But they have to go through the motion. What
Well,
about
then this is,
Okay.
well, can I add one more thing to that too?
Sure,
Part of
sure.
it is because we keep doing presentations the exact same way all the time. We're not creating experiences for people. So of course, all of your employers are going to feel that way. Invite a presenter in that's a little bit off the cuff and doing something different. Encourage your employees to do something a little bit different and off the cuff. Like we're like, everything's very cookie cutter. And so of course people are going to respond negatively when it's going to be the exact same thing they just saw yesterday,
True.
just different content.
Yep, that's very true. What about persuasion?
Persuasion is it's also about story. People often think that they're being persuasive. And when I say persuasion, it means, are you effective at getting people to follow through with your call to action? Right? So your call to action is your CTA, which is usually at the end of your presentation. It doesn't mean that you're always selling people something, but you're calling them to do something. You're inspiring them to do something, feel something, act upon something, to further research something, to, yes, maybe hop on your calendar or buy your product. But the three things that you want them leaving is asking about your presentation is what, so what, and now what? So those are the three questions they should be asking themselves at the end of your presentation. What, so what, and now what?
Many people are guilty of this, especially with the pandemic. The virtual background. Saga. Oh
yes.
boy. So give me some etiquette on virtual backgrounds.
Okay. And again, everyone has an opinion and everyone's opinion is different from the other person's opinion, but this is how I feel, which is a virtual background is fine if your lighting is good. A lot of virtual backgrounds, you're not getting lost in your virtual background right now, and it's not distracting me, but a lot of people nowadays, especially solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, they'll have like their one color in the background and then their logos or something scrolling in the background. And my eyes are, again, I'm the visual person. All I'm looking at is like, those colors don't go well together, or why is that thing keep scrolling, or I don't or they keep ghosting out because their lighting isn't great. It's distracting with what their message is. So I strongly feel, and I don't even think my background is that great yet. Like I want to paint my wall and so forth, but I think you should, if you can and have the opportunity to, and the space to stage something intentionally in the background, that's better than having a virtual background. For example, there's one woman that I know who has this really beautiful, she's in a corner, so there's a little bit of depth, and she also teaches yes and, which is the foundation of improvisational work. She has two prints, yes and then she has three very intentional knickknacks. It looks beautiful. It's very clean. It's very crisp. I also have another client of mine who actually had a plaque made with his logo. It's a physical one, not a virtual one. And he's got that and some nice shelving. He actually had one little knickknack on there. I was like, what is that? And he said, it's a sloth. And I said, a sloth? Why a sloth? And he said, well, I love sloths. So now I've learned something about my client that I wouldn't have known before. And now maybe at Christmas time, I'm going to send him a card with a sloth on it and we'll have a laugh, right? So there's something really advantageous to having these great virtual backgrounds that are intentional, or not virtual, I'm sorry, these stage backgrounds that are intentional. We get to learn about each other and something a little bit about each other's world. So that's what I highly recommend. And the lighting piece is crucial. I have right now, I've got two lights. I've got a ring light and I've got one of those little soft box lights that I use. And I also have a Logitech, an HD Logitech webcam. And I try to look directly into that camera when I'm speaking to you. And then if you're speaking to me, then I'm going to look at you on the screen. But so I'm actually just now going into the virtual world and getting beyond your initial question. So I'll stop
No,
there.
that's fine. So my takeaway here, well, let's add on preparation in this case of the virtual background and your positioning, your lighting.
Yeah.
Clear everybody if you're doing it from home. For example, get everybody out of the house or out of your space.
Yes.
None of
Yeah.
this walking through in the background and the dog barking. And, there's certain situations I'm sure that's fine. But, if you're giving a presentation.
Yeah. If you're giving a presentation, I feel if you can clear that space and plan that, it's great. It really helps. It doesn't distract you. And headphones, I think wearing headphones, blocking out any external noise is also very helpful.
I agree. All right, just a couple more.
Yeah.
Can you give too much information in a presentation?
Yes. I always say leave people wanting more.
Give me an example.
Well, so okay. If I'm giving data, right, or I've researched something, it's not my job to give people all of the information, because my hope is, as the presenter, that they're going to continue. I've inspired them to go and continue being curious, asking more questions, further researching something, or continuing the conversation, right? If I try to do a whole brain dump in my presentation, then it's going to be really difficult for anyone to be inspired to want to continue the conversation and to do their further research. So I always say, edge on leaving them wanting more. If, for example, too, if you've been asked to give a 45-minute presentation, I say, and you can tell the planners or whomever ahead of time, like, I've got a solid 35. I timed myself last night. I've got a solid 35. And be okay with that. Like, I think sometimes what happens is we feel like we need to fill the entire time that we've been allotted, and it actually hurts our presentations. I did a lot of improv in Chicago. We were given 20-minute time slots. And you'd think 20 minutes, that's barely anything for an improv show, but it's improv. And we'd have somebody working the booth that was running the lights. And if that person was really good at running the lights, they would do lights out, blackout on the best punchline, even if it only ran 15 minutes, because you want to leave your audience in an uproar, excited, informed, and wanting to come back for the next show.
That's interesting. So relying on other people when you're giving a performance.
Yeah, if you've got a team, you got to use your collaborators. It's all about communicating, because it's about, again, if you put the audience first, how are you best serving them? You can't serve them the best without really getting your team together, collaborating, and talking about what you need in order to make that happen.
Is it good to ask questions during your presentation?
To engage your audience, yeah, it depends on what kind of question it is. If it's a closed-ended question, for example, like, did you have a good day? Yes, no, right? Versus, hey, what's one thing that you did today that brought you joy?
Interesting.
Right? So that's a great way to engage your audience, especially on virtual calls, like when they're coming in. Be very specific. Like, what's when, at the beginning of the pandemic, one woman, I entered into her Zoom presentation. She asked the question, what's one hobby that you've picked up during the pandemic?
That makes people think.
Yeah. And a bunch of people were like, I make sourdough bread now, or, I started painting and doing collage work, or.
Would that be considered an icebreaker?
I think so. Yeah. And that does two things. It warms up your audience to you, and it warms you up to your audience, and you learn something, and that you might be able to call back later on into your presentation.
Yeah. Okay. So you said 90% of giving a presentation is anxiety. Is that right? 90% or not? Am I wrong?
90%. I said that.
Well, maybe I'll reframe. Maybe you didn't say that, but let's just say what percentage of a presentation? I know there's a lot of variation to that question.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of anxiety. Let's just put it that way. If we're dealing with, say, my audience, high school or college students, right? Maybe not in the advanced world. And we kind of touched base on that before, But what are some other ways that people can overcome anxiety?
Right. Yes. Now I remember this TikTok.
See?
Yes, I get it. Yes. Yes. Anxiety. So I want to clarify two things. First of all, there's anxiety and there's nerves,
Mhm.
right? And feeling nervous usually happens right up until the event itself, and then it dissipates once the event is over. Okay. Nerves are completely normal, and you can actually transform those thoughts from I'm nervous into I'm excited, right?
Yeah, sure.
Use that energy to catapult you into your presentation. I'm excited to do this. This is awesome. Anxiety is something that is constant, right? So that constant state of, and I'm talking more like minor anxiety, not extreme anxiety, but that like it's always on your mind. You can't quite shake it. You feel that heaviness in your chest, right? So the way that you can negotiate that is noticing and calling it minor anxiety and going, okay. And then finding ways that you can help regulate that fight or flight response that you're feeling. And breath work is an incredible way to do that. So the 4-7 breath, which is an inhale through the nose on a 4 count and exhale through the mouth on a 7 count, noticing the rising and the falling of your chest and your belly, feeling the floor beneath your feet. There's also box breathing, which is quite popular, which is the inhale on a 4 count, hold on a 4 count, exhale on a 4 count, hold on a 4 count. That's helpful for managing that minor anxiety on a daily basis. And I encourage people incorporate that. Or if you have a practice like yoga or dance or Tai Chi, finding something that calms the nervous system so that you can get out of that state of anxiety, looking at if whether or not you're drinking a lot of coffee or alcohol, that also can boost your anxiety quite a bit. So just really regulating that. Tripling your water intake really helps with that, because the cortisol levels, like first thing in the morning, your cortisol levels are the highest. So if the first thing you're doing is drinking coffee, that's where anxiety can kick in and some of that nervous tension. So just being careful of those habits so that when you do get to the place where you're presenting, I'm not going to say it's going to go away, but you're going to be a lot more neutralized. You're going to have some tools that are going to help guide you. Also physical work, like doing exercise really helps with that as well. I always tell clients to try to incorporate these things at least 15 minutes a day into their routines.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You mentioned giving, or if you had to take over somebody else's presentation, right on the right. There's anxiety, but I won't keep talking about the word anxiety. You're thrown into
Yeah.
You're thrown into a situation where you have to take over a person's presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what are some things we can do in that case?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And that happens often or you're given a deck that HR has approved or someone's approved and you need to deliver this for your organization. Take time really working out your introduction. Like take some solid time to work out your story, your introduction that's relevant to the message that you're delivering to your audience. And then look through those slides and figure out what those transitions are going to be between each of those slides. And again, going back to that structure of who's your audience, right? What is my end in mind? What do they need to know? And answer those 3 questions and then deliver that slide deck the best that you can. But that introduction, if you have that down, it's going to help make the rest of the presentation feel easier.
Right. I think it all depends too on how much time you have.
Truth. If you have 20 minutes, like
I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it.
I wouldn't do it. There's always this thing that people forget that we can do, which is say no.
Right.
There's a lot of power in saying, I can't do that right now. I want to feel prepared. It's important for me to feel prepared, but I will present your data or your slide deck for you. I just need you to give me a little bit more time. Like there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I would be out the door. But anyhow, what about dress code?
Dress code. Well, so if it's a virtual call, the camera's not a huge fan of a bunch of stripes and patterns. So that can really affect how people see you visually. So I say dress up, show up one step higher than where you think your audience is going to show up. That's what I always say. It's because things have gotten so much more casual. I try to show up one step more dressed up than I think the way my client or my audience is going to show up, if that makes sense.
What does that mean? Give me an example.
So if you know, for example, that you're going to be presenting to a tech company and everyone's probably going to be wearing t-shirts and jeans, I'm just being stereotypical, and hoodies, then you probably want to show up maybe in a button up or a t-shirt with a blazer over it. Or if you're a woman, maybe just like a nice sweater, something that like highlights your eyes. Like I wear a lot of blue to show up on meetings because I know that it brings out the blue in my eyes. So just being really intentional. Solid colors are great for online. A few weeks ago, I did a gig in Iowa. I knew people were going to come dressed up, office cash, if you will. So I have this red suit, and I had a choice, and I love this red. It's kind of like my red power suit, and I'm doing air quotes right now, but I could show up in heels, right? Which would be a statement, or I could show up and I had a pair of penny loafers, which is a different statement. One's a little bit more, oh, look at me. And the other one's more like, I'm sporting the red suit, but I'm also down to earth, right? So I chose to wear the penny loafers, knowing who my audience was. And then I didn't feel like I was standing out like a sore thumb, right? I was a little bit more down to earth. That was the intentionality behind that.
It's interesting what somebody wears makes a big difference.
Yeah. Well, you want to be approachable, but you want to be professional.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For my audience,
I feel.
No doubt. Sometimes my audience doesn't understand that. Okay. Last, I think, being punctual. Duh.
Yes. Be punctual. My philosophy is 10 minutes early is on time.
Right.
That's always been my philosophy, and it's served me well, except for like when I'm invited to parties and I show up 10 minutes early and then people are like, dude, I haven't even got the appetizers out yet.
You always have to show up late for a party, right? But what does one say when they are late for a presentation? They put their foot in their mouth sometimes and go into this big explanation of why they're late. Right?
Right.
How do you simplify that?
Well, I think it depends. And I will say, and gender-wise, women tend to be more apologetic than men. I've noticed. Take responsibility for one. Just say, I'm late. Apologies if this has impacted you. However, but it's about taking responsibility. If it was out of your control and maybe it wasn't necessarily your fault, maybe it was the event planner gave you the wrong time. That's different. It's interesting. And when I was saying like women tend to apologize more than men or tend to, I would just say, notice if you're apologizing, saying I'm sorry all the time, or if you're just saying thank you for your patience. Like, thank you so much for being patient. I'm now here. Let's get this party started. I feel as this, or what?
Don't say anything at all.
Or don't say anything at all. Because people may not know you're late.
Right. So in closing, Meridith, I appreciate this conversation. Let's reiterate. Let's start from the beginning. What are some takeaways that young adults, what are some takeaways they can have regarding their presentations? Meaning, everything we talked about, they're deficient in a lot of areas, right? They want to get a good grade. They're in front of their peers giving talks. how can we best set them up for the future from a student to professional life when it comes to giving presentations? You
The
get to build
first-
on your experiences, right? You learn from your mistakes, but what are some of the commonalities that you see that could help them, if at all?
One is notice your posture, notice your physicality. Just be mindful of that. It makes a big deal in terms of how people receive you. And a lot of that, it's about allowing yourself to be seen, if that makes sense. Be well practiced. It doesn't mean you have to have everything memorized. It just means that you need to know it really well. And I know that we've talked about this already, but I can't emphasize that enough. Be well practiced. And the other one is find your stories. Find the stories that are going to connect with your message and use them. Don't be afraid to use story. And yes, some stories are going to feel vulnerable. What I invite is that when you do tell stories that feel vulnerable, that you do a check-in with yourself and ask, am I telling this story from an open wound, which means that you haven't done the healing that's needed before telling that story? And if you haven't done that healing, then please don't tell that story. Continue doing the healing until you do. And this, because there's a lot of people that have suffered traumas and want to tell their story, but it's not the right time. That courage to be able to tell story. And I can't tell you how many people think they're telling stories and they're actually not telling stories. They're giving an idea of what they think a story is. But a true story is going to take us, the audience, on a journey, and we're going to remember it. We're going to remember that more than the data or anything else that you share with us. And that's what you want people to remember you, and you want them to remember that story that connects to your audience, if anything. So show up, allow yourself to be seen, share stories, and you practice, just practice
Great
more.
advice. And you touched on it. I didn't mean to ask you prior. The posture. I think
Posture is huge.
Yes, I even get. I'm guilty of it.
Yeah, well, we just, it's interesting. It's about allowing yourself to take up space. It's really what it's about. Like, you can be slumped in your chair, but as long as you're allowing yourself to be open, like you're still allowing your heart center to be open and to receive. But I do see a lot of people where their shoulders are caved in. They're not being conscious. They're sunken. If you're presenting online, I always say be standing. If you can, stand.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the common words that should not be used? The ums.
Oh yeah, the filler words, ahs, they're unconscious most of the time. So I would recommend people recording themselves, playing it back, hearing what some of those habits are. It's because your brain is thinking much faster than your mouth is able to share the words that your brain is thinking. So really slowing down, allowing those pauses.
I'm guilty.
And
You got me thinking when I'm talking, I'm like, oh my God, I'm talking to an expert here. I should have been doing this. I should have been doing that. Bad me.
You're good. You're great. Yeah.
Cool.
I would really just take the time to look at that. The more you're aware, the easier it is to start cutting those out.
Awesome.
Yes.
Well, Meridith, this has been fun. I do appreciate your time, and hopefully much of my audience will get something out of this. I do appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me.
All right. We will talk soon, okay?
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.